So these reports of, I guess it's Jimmy Butler, but it's coming from Brian Lewis. Because last week we heard Brian Lewis put out there that Jimmy likes Brooklyn. And then Brian comes out today again with some other interesting news regarding Jimmy Butler. And it's today the report is that Jimmy is fond of Brooklyn. Again, Brian Lewis of the New York Post puts this out. And supposedly Jimmy Butler is open to the team. Brian Lewis reported that earlier this month that Jimmy Butler likes the Nets. Butler, who has a player option for the 25-26 season, intends to play out this year without signing an extension with the Miami Heat and become a free agent in 2025. The Miami Heat, however, have shown no interest in trading Butler. Now, I just don't get it. I don't get it because the thing is I think the whole reason for it, because you're saying, look, well, the Nets are rebuilding. I think with the modern NBA and the Nets, because they are able to rebuild now that they have control of their draft picks, but they're not at a position where they have to tear it down to the studs. Like, I think they have Noah Clowney and Nick Claxton and even Jalen Wilson or like a couple dudes that like you should be kind of excited for. And the reason why Jimmy Butler is interested in Brooklyn is Jimmy Butler could be like that Al Horford. You remember when Al Horford signed the first time with Boston before they traded him, or before he went to Philadelphia and then he got traded to OKC and then he got traded back to Boston, like the first time before they, like when they had that, like the whole Kyrie Kemba thing when they were like there. I think Jimmy could be like Al was for the Celtics, or how Fred VanVleet was for the Houston Rockets. Like kind of just bringing an adult in the room and just trying not to accelerate the timeline, but just to like make it better. And I think the whole thing for him is the reason why he's bringing up the Nets is because they will have available cap space next offseason, and they choose the Nets because of the available money. And if he does sign with Brooklyn, he's probably a guy you're like, why would Brooklyn do this? Because they will give him the max. And two things can happen. Either the team's rebuild is accelerated and they become a playoff team or a play-in team, and they can like have Jimmy be the leader and mentor Noah Clowney and Nick Claxton and Jalen Wilson and whoever else you think. And then especially if they win the lottery and they get Cooper Flag, then they could be like, it could be Noah Clowney, Jimmy Butler, Cooper Flag, Jalen Wilson, and all you got to do is find a point guard. And I think there you'd be like, yeah, Jimmy, you just want to stay here? Like we already tanked this season. Cooper came in, and you run it that way. And he becomes like the Al Horford for this group. Or the second option is you bring him in and then you trade him. And you're like, what? Yeah, you sign him, and you kind of do like Jeremy Grant with the Detroit Pistons. Like everybody knew when the Detroit Pistons signed Jeremy Grant a few years ago that they were going to eventually trade him. Like Jeremy Grant was not expected to be a Detroit Pistons long-term. Like he was expected to eventually be traded like he was to Portland. That was always the expectation. So yeah, I think that's the part where if you're following this, you're wondering like, okay, what's going to happen there? But I want to hear your guys' thoughts. The rest of this video is going to be the video from the other day when Mr. Brian Lewis originally put out that this is something that interested Mr. Jimmy Butler. So yeah, that's it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like, comment, and subscribe.
All right, guys, what is going on? And we're hearing some news. The Brooklyn Nets are a potential destination for Jimmy Butler, according to the New York Post. Brian Lewis, links in the description. The quote that we're hearing is, Jimmy Butler reportedly has decided he'll play out next season and won't extend in Miami ahead of his opt-out in 2025. The odds of him picking up his player option are slim unless he agrees to a max extension with the Miami Heat beforehand. The six-time All-Star is the most accomplished standout on, I guess, the Brooklyn Nets trade list target if they wanted to accelerate their rebuild. as he allegedly likes Brooklyn. So let's get into today's video. It's the off season. It's just something to talk about. I want to hear your thoughts down below. Do you think this is something that could happen, that they would go after him? I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section, and let's get right to it, as I definitely think this is something that warrants discussion, as Jimmy Butler is a player at this point that, okay, who is Jimmy Butler? Jimmy Butler would be a player that if you are the Brooklyn Nets, it's you don't want to be a rebuilding team. You've decided that this is not what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and we're going to try to accelerate the rebuild and be a team that is built kind of like how the Miami Heat were able to do when they brought in Jimmy Butler, to go from a team that had a couple pieces, like they had Bam Adebayo. Here you have Nick Claxton and you have Noah Clowney. So you're hoping that, all right, we bring in Jimmy and this is going to make this team be able to take that next step. And that's actually like 100% a valid like assumption, especially with the Nets and their future draft picks being currently tied up to. So in this year's draft, they obviously have the potential to have 4 first-round picks. Like, it's pretty wild. And again, outside of there, they have a lot of stuff to build draft-wise. So if they wanted to go full rebuild, they can. And to finish the dream, or finish what they were doing last season at the same time, or not last season, before they brought in the big three, before they fired Kenny Atkinson, what they were doing, like D'Angelo Russell. Or they can bring in Jimmy Butler and build around the current young guys that they have there, if you think that's the right thing to do. I think the big thing you look at here is Jimmy Butler is obviously a really good two-way guy. He'll play both sides of the court really hard. He's the cultural leader of Miami, and he'll stuff the stat sheet from scoring, rebounding, defense, playmaking, and he'll get buckets from mid-range, fadeaways, inside. I mean, his three-point shot isn't anything crazy, and I know this past season in the playoffs, Jimmy Butler was what? I mean, last year he was an absolute animal with like 26 points, but Butler is a guy who typically turns it on to a whole other level when he gets to the playoffs, and I think that's the whole thing with Jimmy Butler is in the 2024 like playoffs, we got to see the big thing for a guy. He's a 5-time All-NBA player, but the big thing for him is that in this year's like past playoffs, he didn't play. I mean, in that one playing game he did, but this past year we saw what happened with the Heat, and when they didn't have him, yeah, they were able to kind of do their thing, but at the same time they weren't. So I think them having themselves an out to go a different way, and I'm gonna put on the board right here before we get into the meat and potatoes of what we're gonna go and talk about, which is what would a trade for Mr. Jimmy Butler even look like? Because if you're the Heat, you want to still be good. Jimmy's making a decent bit of cash. It's not a little bit of money, just refreshing this. And he's a guy who, health-wise, hasn't been 60 games this past season, 64 before, 57 before that, 52, 58, 55 in Philadelphia. I mean, technically 65 that season, but 59 in Minnesota. He hasn't played 70 games since his last year in Chicago. So again, this is who would be on the board if you were going to be trading for Jimmy, and that's where it becomes difficult in my mind if you're the Heat and you're the Nets, if you're trying to iron out this deal, who's going to be the ones that you go after, I think that's kind of like the difficulty. So yeah, let's just see what we can put together right here. This is Fanspo. So Jimmy Butler, 48.7. Ben Simmons and Bam Adebayo, I'm 95% sure, because they're both rookie max extensions, they can't be on the same team. Either way, why would you do that? there's a weird. I don't think Claxton would obviously be in this deal. My assumption is if you're the Heat, you would just want maybe something along this lines, and I'm trying to think of anybody else. I know in theory, Shake Milton would be somebody that they could maybe go after because he's an older player on this team. But outside of that, I don't even know if they would want Dennis. I mean, Dennis Schroeder seems like he would somebody that the Heat would want. I know they definitely wouldn't want Boyan, but at this point, you're sending outgoings 48.7, but incomings 51.5. If you were right here, you probably would say then throw in Nikola Jovic because he's a young guy that maybe the Nets would be interested in. And again, we don't even know what the draft pick compensation would be. But right here, yeah, the Heat would have to cut 311K. But right here, this is actually allegedly a fair deal. So if you'd have to find someone with a bit bigger salary than Jovic if you wanted to do a massive deal like this. And this is how you would have to do it for the money. Someone's going to be like, well, they would want to get rid of Boyan. I'm just saying, if I'm the Heat, I'd be like, I'd take less draft pick compensation if you'd give up these types of players. So if you're telling me Jovic's money's not enough, I definitely know there's no way in hell that they're going to be sending Jaime Jaquez in this deal. I feel like they would want to keep Mr. Josh Richardson. I really feel like if you did Jovic and I guess Pelle Larsson, because Larsson is on a regular deal, I believe. Picks wise, if I'm Miami, I don't have a pick in this year's upcoming draft, so I would. OKC has the right to swap its 20 for Houston's, and then I feel like this is. I'll probably go with New York's to the Heat. And that could really. Is there any other picks that I would want? I guess 20. If you give me like your worst 27 pick, which right here will go Philadelphia. Would this be too much? This is what the deal would have to look like. So you'd walk away with. I mean, it's not crazy. It's not a crazy deal. Nets have themselves two young dudes in Jovic and Pelle Larsson. And the Heat walk away with Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith to basically take up Jimmy Butler's spot, and they get themselves a point guard in Schroeder who kind of fits their like culture. I know it's kind of weird, but would that even? I'll show you what like the roster would then look like if they were to do that. That's kind of how. So this would be the Heat's roster: Schroeder, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Bam Adebayo, Hero, Rozier, Haywood Smith. Now some people are going to be like, well, they're feeling like the Nets are getting gyffed. Maybe.